Hi, and welcome to another series of the Melissa Roberts Foundation online training modules. My name is Bruce Roberts, and I'm the chair of the Melissa Roberts Foundation. Today we're going to talk about recovery, and recovery in the context of a voice hearer. Now, this is module 6 of 7 modules in the Hearing Voices training series. In the first 5, we've talked a lot about the experience, how to make sense of the experience, looking at different tools that we can use to help people move forward towards recovery. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what recovery might look like in the context of a voice hearer. Just to take a cliche, recovery is not only possible, it's inevitable. And that's a fairly, if I can use the word ballsy comment by a psychologist of all people, who actually was had a client called Eleanor Longdon, who's a voice hearer. Now, recovery is not only possible, it's inevitable. Because of the complexities around mental health issues, you very rarely get clinicians sort of putting their hand up and making any kind of positive view about the potential of people recovering or trying to define what recovery might look like. So that's a fairly strong emphasis. But I must say, in the case of Eleanor Longdon, it proved to be a very, very important part, because when talking to Eleanor, she said that part of the biggest problem in her journey up to the point where she turned the corner, if you like, towards recovery, was people being able to provide hope. Hope is not something that comes openly and freely in services, unfortunately. And I don't try to be too critical, because it is, mental health issues can be very complex. And so they don't want to give false hope, but we find that people respond better if they are working in a situation where recovery will happen. It's just a matter of how we're going to get there. And we find that gives them an inner strength and ability to be able to focus on the issues that are concerning them, rather than worrying about whether it will ever happen, and or particularly if people are kind of suggesting that it probably won't happen. And a lot of people get that diagnosis: yes, you're schizophrenic, you'll be on medication for the rest of your life, you probably won't work again, you just have to do your best. I mean, those sorts of things are unhelpful, and we know that many people recover. So hope is very important in this process. But let's talk about recovery. What's your biggest fear? Recovery. What's your greatest dream? Recovery. What does that mean? Well, before we can work with people, we have to determine where they sit on the scheme of things about recovery. It's a reality in life that some people don't want to recover. People are happy in the situation they're in. One of the main things we find with people with lived experience, and people in general, is that we're very resilient. We're survivors. We find a way to cope with the most horrible circumstances in life. Now, I run a lot of self-help groups for voice hearers and different demographics and ages. And often you find that people that have been entrenched in their voice experience for long periods of time often find it difficult or unwilling to try and move mountains, if you like, to move from being where they are into what we would consider to be a more normal, recovered environment. And the reasons for that are simple. Basically, people who are in a situation where you say, well, do you want to go get a job? Do you want to have a relationship? Do you want to have a high social profile? And all these sorts of things. We ask them those questions, or would you rather stay where you are? And what we find is that people, even though they are in a situation where their life circumstances aren't what we would call normal, they've developed a working situation around their experiences. So they find that the fear of normality, mortgages and relationships and working and all those things, are far more frightening than dealing with the life they're living. So we find that you can't just assume that people want to go from A to B. You have to determine where they sit on the grid. If you don't do that, then you can't help them. So you need to be able to determine where they sit on that grid. And often you find that people say, well, look, I want to move part of the way down that trip, but I don't want to go all that way. I'm happy to deal with that and work around those situations. So you must understand where a person sits. Are they in that situation, or do they want to be in that situation? And I'll give you an example. Running a group, two groups. One group had a demographic of people who are about 18 to 40, and the other one had from 40 to about 75. I found that the latter group were more fearful of what we would consider to be full recovery, as opposed to the younger group who were more conducive to the idea of moving forward, because they'd not been locked in the situation of stuck in stage 1 of voice hearing for years and years and years. So you have to be able to know where that person sits in the scheme of things if you're going to be helpful in helping them move forward with whatever direction and to whatever limit they see is appropriate. Recovery is possible and psychiatry can be wrong. You must remember that there is always the smallest of flames present in the most extreme case. Despite what some people may think or assume, a person's lights never go out. It's the role of mental health workers to reach inside that person and reignite that flame. Now, that source is Peter Bullimore, my colleague. Now, Peter was locked away in services for 10 years, and he was a throw the key away patient. He had long, scruffy hair. He didn't respond to anybody, didn't respond to any clinical interventions or whatever, and he was extremely tormented by his voices. So, if anyone was in a situation where Peter was one that was considered to be someone who was just isn't going to make it, well, that's history. Peter's a recovered voice hearer. He's a world trainer and presenter, and all the things we talked about in the last 5 videos about helping people move forward. That's the journey Peter took. That's the journey he elected to take. So again, recovery is possible, but you just need to be able to make sure that that person is willing to take those quantum leaps, if that's right, or set their own boundaries in that regard. Peter obviously was. He was very keen to move forward, and he was able to do that, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. So when we talk about recovery, what is it in the context of voices? Well, it's not about getting rid of the voices. It's about changing your relationship with them. Most people who hear voices will hear voices for the entirety of their life. Voices rarely go away. Yes, they do in some cases, but they rarely go away. And when they even do go away, it's very difficult to attribute any particular issue as to why that was. Was it the medication? Was it some other form of treatment? Was it the consultation? But essentially, we don't really know what that was. But we do know that in most cases, people who live with lived experience have got that experience for life. So it's a question of learning how to live in harmony with the voices, not trying to waste a lot of energy and time by trying to eliminate or eradicate them, because it rarely happens. So what do we talk about in terms of recovery? I mentioned before about hope being an important element. It's a critical element. You need to be able to build hope for somebody to move forward. Get rid of that disempowering view of what we call pervading hopelessness. People tend to live their dialogue or live the actual symptoms and the labels that they're given. You ask someone, who are you? And they say, my name's Joe and I'm a paranoid schizophrenic. I'm saying, well, I'm not interested in talking about, what definition someone's given you about a symptom. I want to know about the person. So building hope is important. Sharing stories of recovery is very important. Challenging the idea that schizophrenia is a lifelong and incurable disease is important. You need to be able to create hope. You have to normalise the experience. It's a common human experience, and you need to be able to make people feel comfortable about having the conversations. Acceptance of the voices, and we've talked about that in previous modules, about accepting the fact they are real and accepting the fact that they belong to the voice hearer. Finding a meaning or an explanatory framework for the voices, again, we've talked about that as being critical to recovery. Changing the power balance, shifting that fear level, taking the control away from the voices and back to the voice hearer. Profiling voices in detail, another good tool we've used and we've talked about before, about how to learn more about the experience in a snapshot and using that in a clinical environment. Dialoguing with voices is another tool that can be used in being able to understand what it is, what are the voices doing in the life of the person and why are they there. Helping them with social and relationship skills, recognising the links between the voices and life experience. Getting supportive counselling for past trauma. Again, I talked before about you'll get to a point when you start peeling back the layers, looking at life history and the onset of the voices. You'll come across things in that life, traumatic events that you can't deal with. There'll be issues around those events that aren't your specialty. You may only be a social or a support worker. You may be a psychologist, but you don't have those specific skills. You need to then be able to determine who are the best person for that person. Is someone in bereavement counselling? Is there someone for counselling for for sexual abuse or sexual concerns or emotional concerns, you need to be able to find the right person. You need to support them in that process. Helping others with their voices and recovery. Groups are very important for that, and helping other people is also can be a tonic for personal recovery as well. So remember, recovery is a personal experience. We can't define someone's recovery for them. As I mentioned before, not everybody wants to recover. So people need to be able to be given the option of determining where they sit on the bar of recovery. Full recovery in the context of our own definitions, or recovery is set by them within certain constraints. It's very important that we do that. And it's very important so that when we get to a situation where people can live in harmony or to the level of where they want to be with their hearing voice experience. Again, it's a personal journey. So that's the end of Module 6. And of course, the last module in our Hearing Voices series is helpful hints for carers and family. The do's and don'ts for carers and family of voice hearers. And I have personal experience of that one, so I'll be able to help you with that. So hopefully none of that has been disturbing, but if you've been disturbed in any way by any of this content, please look at your options. Lifeline here in Australia is an option, 131114, obviously, or your mental health practitioner, a family member or friend if you're feeling a bit disturbed after watching this video. If you're in another country, of course, you'll have to look at your own options in that regard. Thanks again for being part of the process, and bye for now.